Hey everyone, it is your host for today, Patrick McLain, co-founder and host of Reimagine, this 15th event where we are bringing students and experts in the industry together to have interesting conversations and kind of understand the state of the market. Before we get started, I'll let everyone introduce themselves. Luke, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. Hi, everyone. I'm Luke Clancy. I'm the co-founder and president of Illini Blockchain, which is the University of Illinois blockchain student group, founded around 4 years ago. But yeah, I'm pretty excited to be here, Patrick. Thanks for having me and organizing this.
Nice. But quick question: How many students do you guys have interested on campus nowadays?
Yeah, so it's a little difficult to gauge. So our internal team, which is like application based, we have 44 people. And then our external community is probably around like 500 to 750. We've got like 1,000 people on our newsletter, got like around 100 people coming to each event that we throw. And then a few different startups in the ecosystem and a few other clubs that are doing blockchain initiatives. So I'd ballpark it at like 1,000, 750 to 1,000.
Sounds like some cool things going on there. David Galvan, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hello, everybody. Thanks for having me. My name is Dave Galvan. I'm with Mastercard, and I lead our Fintech engagement practice. So I'm the guy at the company who talks to lots of fintechs. Probably 500 a year is my clip these days. All different types of fintechs. From neobanks to wealth management companies, lenders, dispersers, consumer, commercial, you name it. Obviously, you know, crypto and blockchain is a pretty significant part of my portfolio, so pretty well versed in the subject.
Definitely. Well, glad to have you and to understand a little bit of Mastercard's perspective. So I'll kick off our first kind of topic here. I think from my perspective, being in the blockchain industry for a while, I've always seen Mastercard, I would say, like of the institutional banking companies, it has always been more or less at the forefront of the crypto side, like wrapping their arms around it. Maybe I'll describe it as less scared. Definitely ahead of like the visas, etc. I think 2 or 3 years ago, you guys even joined our education alliance when we had a MouseBelt. So really curious to understand, from what you can talk to on the Mastercard side, after what we just went through with FTX, with all this news, all this drama, with Silvergate, we saw, I think it looks like they're about to shut down, right? Like regulators are applying pressure across the board. So how does Mastercard view this? Like scared, more excited?
So I don't think we're scared or excited. We're pragmatic, right? Mastercard, we're a network. We've always been pragmatic about innovation, which is why we've built such a strong fintech practice. I've been running this practice for 8 years now. So 8 years ago, we saw an opportunity to start working with fintechs because they were providing a lot of value for consumers, doing things maybe that banks weren't doing and doing them quicker, all for the benefit of consumers. And we wanted to be a part of that, right? And so when we started to notice a lot of innovation in crypto and blockchain, again, we're pragmatic, right? We provide the rails that allow people to move money and commerce, right? We want consumers to do that safely and securely, but we're not like the currency police, right? We support like 80 currencies across the globe, and we're not deciding what currency people are using to purchase things, right? If there's enough demand for a currency, we will support it on our rails. And so I think if you look at it in totality, we've always been supportive of people that were doing innovative things, either on the blockchain or as related specifically to crypto and crypto-like programs. We always wanted it to be done safely, securely, follow all the regulatory procedures, but beyond that, we're not afraid of innovation. So we've always been relatively pragmatic about them.
Definitely. And like, do you guys see this as a way to separate yourself from the pack?
I mean, I don't know if we're so much concerned about separating ourselves from the pack so much as we're concerned about Mastercard staying relevant as a company, right? We fundamentally believe that we need to diversify revenue out of core. Core for us is card processing, right? We don't want to become Polaroid in 10 years because some better way of moving money came around, right? And so we don't want to be disintermediated, and we want to be pragmatic. And one of the ways to do that is to create a lot of differentiated revenue streams, right? We don't even consider ourselves like a payments company. We really consider ourselves a technology company, right? And because of all of this, it wasn't about separating from the pack. It was about embracing original and innovative ideas in this space.
Yeah, agnostic of whatever technology was behind it. Like,
yeah.
Got it. Appreciate that. Luke, you wanna take us in with your first question?
Yeah, for sure. I'm actually I'll go a little bit against my my original question in the name of the conversation and the way that we're flowing. And I'm curious, what areas of fintech do you see like blockchain being pretty ripe for disrupting, or for someone like Mastercard to use or partner with another company to help people make more money or move money more efficiently, right? Is it international payments, or is it remittances? Yeah, what do you think is pretty ripe for disruption?
I mean, look, blockchain's just a protocol, right? What's interesting is what sits on the blockchain and what you do with the blockchain. Clearly, a lot of the association with digital currencies has been somewhat tainted, to Patrick's point about FTX and the downstream effect. And I'll be honest, a lot of the consumer-facing coin-centric programs that I was looking at last year, they literally disappeared overnight, right? That doesn't mean the blockchain has disappeared. The blockchain is a really interesting protocol. It's the foundation of Web3 infrastructure, as you know. The repurpose of some of this stuff against maybe a consumer, crypto-backed product is definitely happening. I think some of the areas that I've seen that are really interesting are stuff centered around smart contracts. Definitely, we see remittances as a big opportunity to move digital currencies from point A to point B safely and securely. And again, we're not like telling this ship where to go, right? Yeah. We're providing the tool sets and the products and services to help guide that innovation, right? Wherever it goes. Remittance is definitely one of those areas that I think is super interesting. I've seen a movement into cold storage and access to digital currencies out of cold storage programs. The management of contracts and information across multiple areas is something that we've started to see. The management of identity across the ecosystem, also something I'm starting to see, just to name a few.
I'm curious, once you spot a trend, right? So for example, remittances, we believe that remittances will be really, really helpful for people. How do you, as the Vice President of Business Development, go about executing to eventually develop partnerships and position Mastercard in a good way, right? Are you calling a bunch of different startups? What does it look like?
Yeah, so it's a little bit of both. I mean, I think the one great thing about Mastercard and the fact that we've built such a strong reputation in the industry for supporting fintech and innovation is that we get a lot of people coming our way asking for advice and asking how they might partner with a network or how Mastercard might add value to what they're building. So my ecosystem, Luke, as you mentioned, is business development. So I'm top of funnel. I talk to lots and lots of people, but I also cultivate relationships with sort of specific entities. So for example, I work with 35 venture capital firms, right? And and I routinely talk to them about their portfolios, right? And a lot of them come to me and say, hey, we're talking to this company, they're doing this weird blockchain thing, they want to try this. Is this going to even work from Mastercard's or a regulatory perspective, right? Could you talk to that company for us? And so at this stage, you know, we got a lot of folks inbound just from the relationships that we have, the customers that we have built. But then also we do a lot of outbound stuff, right? We host a lot of conferences and events. We're thought leaders in the space. So I think it's a little bit of a two-way street. You know, having to do with our experience and our pedigree in this space.
Definitely. Well, I wanted to go back to one point you were saying, like kind of the value add places that you guys are trying to add value. You know, I think one of my good friends actually was part of made a show about crypto. Dave Jevons. You guys acquired his company CipherTrace. I thought it was a really interesting acquisition. So, you know, how do you guys see you adding those type of capabilities to really leading in the blockchain realm?
Yeah. And CipherTrace is a perfect example of our ability to partner with a company that's outside a core, right? If the world evolves, I mean, theoretically, and you know, if you think if a particular network, a digital, like a blockchain network becomes big enough, right, has enough endpoints, right? We have 180 million endpoints in the world. If there was another entity that became that big, that had 250 million endpoints, which is super hard to do, it took us 60 years to do it. Well, let's just say that happened. Well, they could operate outside of my network, right? So I wouldn't be able to provide any value in that network, right? And so we obviously don't want that to happen. We don't want to get disintermediated as a network, but we're pragmatic, right? And so we provide a lot of services like CipherTrace, which, you know, provides network tracking of digital currencies, ID verification. We own a company called Akata that's used by almost every major exchange to provide ID verification. The whole idea then is Mastercard could participate and be part of that network, even if we weren't moving that digital currency from point A to point B. That makes sense?
Yeah. Like, and I feel like that's how a lot of companies think about it, as they realize, you know, that this stuff is open and they can tap into it, right, without actually, you know, being the core gatekeeper or provider.
Right.
Like all the data is accessible. But yeah, no, that was always an interesting acquisition. I think what CipherTrace does, and there's a lot of movements going on around identity, building profiles of people, right? And I think it's very interesting, as you can prove your wealth without knowing anything about the person to a certain extent, right? Or other attributes. But hey, Luke, do you wanna take us to another question?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, as a follow-up, I was pretty curious. So there's the value of your network, right? There's the power of having millions and millions of endpoints, just being bigger than everybody else. And then there's also, you're trying to hedge against that by providing partnerships in other areas where you're not directly plugged into. When you're chatting with different startups related to the blockchain space, how many people are looking to, you know, get inside of your network and tap into that power? And how many are outside or external to it? And what are those?
I mean, look, at this stage in the game, there is no network that's big enough to displace Mastercard or Visa or any of the big established networks in the world. So, you know, our engagement with crypto-centric companies or blockchain-centric companies have really been more in line with how we can become part of the network, right? As opposed to operating outside of the network. Even companies like FTX, right? As big as they were working with a network, right, on the card product that they issued. Now, it wasn't ours, it was our competitors, and luckily we dodged that bullet. But that the whole idea was, if you had a bunch of digital currency in your FTX exchange and you wanted liquidity against that, you couldn't go to the Gap and do an FTX wallet tap and move, a digital currency out of your FTX wallets into the Gap, right? You couldn't, that doesn't exist, right? So we provide the steps to that, right? So the real step is that digital currency is sold for fiat cash. That fiat cash is quickly moved to a cash account, and that cash account is what's used at point of sale to buy blue jeans, right? And the proxy for that is a network card. So in that construct, we're still an essential part of the digital currency ecosystem, right? And whether it's Gemini or countless other partners that we have, none of them have come to us and said, we're so big that we don't need a network.
Yeah.
And actually, I want to build on that point a little bit, because I feel like I saw for years, like maybe years ago, I saw a shift where there was like a lot of, I've always been intrigued by like kind of prepaid, like the BitPay card, for example, where like you just said, people sell crypto, maybe it gets moved to a cash account and then gets loaded to like a prepaid type system. I feel like I saw Visa on some of those cards, and then years ago I saw like a lot of them started to be a Mastercard as I would see them. And I'm just curious your take. Like, I feel like right now, like it seems like many regulators are trying to kind of shut off fiat or protect like fiat to crypto rules. Where do you guys kind of see that going? Like, is that debit card to crypto thing kind of a niche, or is that like a long-term hack where you guys kind of are an exchange at that point, right? Like,
so in that infrastructure, like, and FTX is a perfect example. Nobody's pointing a finger at Visa for being malfeasant, right? Visa managed a fiat cash card at point of sale, right? Completely regulated card. Whether it's a debit card, a credit product backed by securities, or a prepaid card loaded with fiat cash, everything that hits that card through a bank partner of ours and then hits our network adheres to all of our regulatory standards, right? So nobody is pointing the finger at our bank partners or our or the network for the way that we manage those programs, because it's just fiat cash, right? The part that is a little bit dicey is how those digital assets were managed by FTX, right? The fact that and folks are looking at FTX as being needing, and exchanges needing to be regulated. They're looking actually at the digital currency to be regulated against volatility. They're looking at the way that those accounts are managed to create, to be compliant with OFAC rules, anti-money laundering rules, ID verification rules, right? And some of the banks that have stood these programs up adhere to these programs because they have to. And they've gotten a little bit squirrely about some of these exchanges in the way that they manage customer bases, right? Clearly, there's going to be a bunch of regulatory folks stepping in to manage the way that these digital currencies are held, liquidated, right? So you have a taxable event. What we're doing as a network, nothing's going to change because there were no digital currencies that ever came onto our network, right? And our bank partner had to verify and guarantee, right, the issuer of that card, the person that card was given to met their KYC, AML, and OFAC standards, right? It's everything beyond that that is a little bit gray, right?
On that note of like regulatory issues and sort of bringing it back to what you talked about earlier with giving advice to a lot of different startups who are starting up the space, and some of them just kind of getting things wrong, right? Where they just don't know a lot about the space, whether it be regulatory issues or like just general technology of like how the network works. What would you say are some, I don't know, common themes that you see people getting wrong about what blockchain could mean or DeFi could mean in the context of, finance?
So, I mean, to your point, Luke, it's super complicated, right? There is a lot of regulatory requirements that the US banking system and the global banking system has, right? When you start touching that, you need to adhere to it, right? And so the common fallacy is the idea that you can take that great anonymity that you created in the blockchain and the crypto world, and it applies to a regulated industry like US banking, right? That's that's not going to happen, right? On top of that, there are just basic rules that you need to adhere to, whether they're set up by an issuing bank or the network, that you have to adhere to when you're issuing cards. Perfect example is, I can't tell you how many folks I've talked to that are like, oh, well, I'm based in the Cayman Islands and I'm going to issue this global spend card for everybody all over the world because that's where my customers are. And I'm like, yeah, great idea, never going to happen, right? There is no such thing as global issuing for anybody, right? You have to issue a card where your customers live, period, full stop, right? They need to be identified, verified, and have an address. In the US, it's a verifiable US address, right? You want to ship a card to Dubai, well, you need to work with a bank partner in Dubai that's going to issue that card in Dubai, right? And do the appropriate KYC AMLs needed, right? And if you're working with like a network, ensure that you meet all the network requirements of global issuing, right? And so the single biggest fallacy that I work with is this idea, well, I'm going to issue this card in my digital wallet and it works everywhere with minimal KYC. That's full stop, just never going to happen, right? And beyond that, then I get all kinds of, questions. I'm in Puerto Rico and I want to issue a card and well, you can't do it because you're not a bank and things like that, right? And so I routinely engage, and this isn't just crypto and blockchain programs, this is fintech in general, right? If you're pushing the envelope a little bit and trying to do things that are innovative, sometimes those bump up against sort of the regulatory rules that have been put in place, right? And Mastercard's not a bank, so I'm not even a regulated entity, right? It's most of the regulation that is put in place it falls upon our bank partners to adhere to follow, right? And quite frankly, a lot of these banks that looked at some of these fintech programs 4 or 5 years ago, they're like, oh, this is cool, it's a shiny marble, it's a fintech, I want to do it. They kind of didn't know what they were getting into, right? And in the early days of fintechs, a lot of these programs kind of just flew under the radar. So what you're seeing now is a lot of these banks are like, hey, 5 years ago, I really didn't do my due diligence on this program. That's never going to happen again, right? I am going to manage every program to the T. And I'm also concerned about reputational risk, right? I don't want to be dragged into an article in the Wall Street Journal with FTX, right? And so, you know what? I'm not even going to do crypto programs anymore, right? Nobody needs a Dogecoin debit card, right? And so I'm not even going to stand that program up, right? And so you've got a little bit of pushback to Patrick's point earlier, some of the trickle-down effects of FTX and Binance and all the Silvergate, all of these companies essentially imploding is causing a lot of concern about banks. Are like, you know what, from a reputational standpoint, even if you adhere to all of the regulatory stuff, I don't even want to do this program.
Well, and even on like for this event, to like longtime friends of mine, like Paul Brody's like head of blockchain for Ernst & Young, and Paolo Andrino, the CTO of Tether. I've had conversations with them the last 2 days and been wanting to get their insight after what's happened in the last few months. And, I think on one side you have a company like Tether and Paolo saying, they want to be audited by like the big four, right? But he can empathize with them and say, well, they won't touch us, right? Because there's a reputational component to it, right? And so I think, you know what I mean, and yeah, there is, I think, that opportunity cost. But one thing you were saying earlier, I wanted to segue a bit. Like many years ago, like my early 20s, I lived like in Tanzania for a long time, and I saw what they did with like M-Pesa and kind of like moving money on phones like over a decade ago, right? And I think people in the Western world probably still wouldn't fully grasp that. How does MasterCard, how are you guys viewing it from kind of a regional perspective? Because I feel like maybe the Western world has less immediate need because they have so much infrastructure to use crypto. But if you look at some of these developing nations, it makes more sense for them. So how do you guys see it as like a different strategy regionally?
So I mean, you're spot on. This goes back to the whole remittances sort of conversation. Most of those remittances, they're not peer-to-peer in the US, right? They're peer-to-peer outside of the US, or account to account outside of the US. And so moving money from point A to point B, let's just say Africa. When Africa is a perfect example of a country that has a terrible banking system, right? And hyperinflation, right? Cash-based society, people don't trust banks. They trust the phone company more than they trust a bank, right? Which is why you've got Orange and all these other companies creating phone-based digital banking systems, either on the acceptance or on the issuing side. Again, I think that's a perfect use case. Moving a stable coin, which doesn't have to touch, sort of the cost and the incomplete banking system in certain countries is absolutely a use case for a digital currency, no question about it.
Got it. Appreciate that.
And much easier to build that infrastructure, right? You're just going to account. All you need are off ramps, right? How do you convert a stable coin, in somebody's digital phone to cash or some other product that they can use to buy goods and services in local market, right? And in many instances, it's just cash, right? A big part of our network in many of these countries is bank to cash, right? Because nobody wants a card. If I give somebody, in an undeveloped country a card, they got nowhere to spend it, right? They're living in a cash-based society, so we provide cash out capabilities, and I think we've got like over 100,000 cash out capabilities across the world, so somebody can go to an ATM, punch in a code, and get cash in the local currency.
Well, I just want to ask one thing, and I'll kick it to you, Luke. But as I heard you say that, like, do you think there's ever a world where people like cash out less, like they just keep it in the currency and trade amongst themselves and pass from A to B?
Sure. I mean, that's nirvana for us. I mean, if you ask Mastercard who our biggest competition and what the biggest market opportunity for us, it's not Visa. That's not our biggest competitor. Our biggest competitor in the world is cash, right? So how do we take more cash out of the ecosystem, put it on our network to provide a better experience for consumers, a trusted experience, a safe and secure experience? That is our mantra, and it's the single biggest market opportunity we have as a network is cash.
I never thought of it like that. Luke, you wanna take us in?
Yeah, I thought that was pretty interesting. And building off the Africa thing, so I totally agree with you. On paper, it seems like an amazing use case, right? It's like sending a stable coin in a country where like it's hard to get a stable currency, and you don't have like, you just can't even trust your bank to keep your money safe. Like obviously that's a pretty good solution. On your guys' end, is it actually being used that way? I don't know how deep your roots are in a place like Tanzania or something like that, but are people in those countries using it?
So to be honest, no. This goes back to the last mile, right? So you send a stable coin to somebody in Kenya and it's sitting on their phone. What are they going to do with it, right? They need cash, right? And that mile, that stable coin to cash mile hasn't been built yet, right? Other companies like big remittances companies, they're not moving stable coins. They're providing, they're moving dollars from point A to point B, providing the FX conversion at the back end, creating a local currency, moving that local currency into a bank where people can then either come, you spend off of a card if they have a card with that bank, or get cash through an ATM or another mechanism of withdrawal. So that's the network that we have built. This whole, again, this is back to the conversation. This network hasn't been created yet, right? You give somebody a stable coin in Kenya, they have no place to spend it because nobody accepts stable coin. It's just moved money safely from account holder to account holder. They still got to figure out what to do with it next, right? And that's going to take time to build out. The areas where we've been more involved with the movement of digital currencies from point A to point B, it's usually government to government or bank to bank, is through like CBDCs and things like that, right? A lot of this money movement we've seen is either government to government or bank to bank to smooth out and to make ledger entries more easier to happen. We haven't seen it trickle down into broad-based consumer plays yet.
It's interesting to see this narrative, right? That like sort of isn't true yet, but we built so high.
It's a great narrative, right? I mean, I have this happens in the digital, in the fiat cash world too. If you've got a banking app, in the US and a banking app in Brazil, so you move money from wallet to wallet. What do you do with it next, right? That's the part that hasn't quite been figured out yet.
No, I think it's interesting. I think many people are not buying that cup of coffee with crypto. And for me personally, the closest I've ever seen come to it is like Mastercard BitPay. Like this is like the most convenient way to actually do it in a lot of circumstances. But actually, go back on what you were saying on the CBDC stuff. I feel like that conversation has been boiling up for, I don't know, call it 5 years or something, accelerated in the last 2 years. I think my personal take is like after this whole FTX debacle, it's probably going to get ushered in much more quickly. It'll be like, hey, that Bitcoin in that crypto world, that's the scary stuff. We have your approved version right here. I think there's interesting implications there where you start to think of it as like, why do you need a bank at that point? It's more like you just have an app to check your balance. How are you guys viewing that era being ushered in? Like, do you think it's coming quickly? And then does it change your guys' role in the position, like between banks and how money's distributed?
So again, I think you make a good point. It feels to me that the obvious setbacks that we've seen with the FTX and then the downstream trickle effect of that have impacted a lot of government, bank to bank, and even, consumer crypto programs, right? I think if you talk to, venture guys, for example, they're not interested in any more Coinbase crypto stuff. They're like, that ship sailed, they're done, right? They don't even want to look at it.
Give them 18 months. I've seen this cycle.
So here's the thing. They've changed their tune a little bit. It's all about infrastructure, right? So we don't know what digital currency is going to survive. It's going to be regulated. It's going to be used. Could be, USDC. It could be a stable coin. It could be, Bitcoin, Ethereum, and a few others. But we don't care. All right, nobody wants that now. This stuff is all going to be dragged out 5 to 7 years. Nobody wants to buy, blue jeans with Bitcoin. So what we're going to focus on is building coin agnostic infrastructure, right? And that's where the VCs are putting their money this year. I don't know about next year. You're right. So it's all about building that infrastructure to support all of these different use cases. Coin agnostic. So and then they'll plop in whatever coin, whatever consumer wants at any given time. My sense is that's where this ship is moving. A lot of these like CBDC programs and other things that people are working on, they've realized that consumer demand is now waned, and so there's going to be less of a need for it in the near term. So we can probably punt on this stuff for 5 years.
Got it. Appreciate that.
That's just my sort of, foot on the ground, soldier on the ground sort of view of the world. Before FTX collapsed, I probably was talking to 15 or 20 different exchanges and non-custodial wallets, and that were all doing really interesting things with different types of digital currencies that wanted some connectivity to the network. Those problems just literally disappeared overnight. And because those programs are disappearing, which, the banks aren't involved, the networks aren't involved, the fundamental belief is they're too risky, consumers don't want them. I just think that that's going to cause everybody to reassess, one, what they're doing with a digital currency, and two, how they offer those digital currencies to their customers.
No, definitely. Yeah, look, I think I was joking with Luke before we joined. We were in the waiting room, and we've been funding these university programs since 2017, and I remember back late 2017, early 2018, I'm like giving grants to these schools and like giving them money to buy pizza and shit, right? Like they can have a club, and they're getting letters like, "Hey, we can't be associated with this drug coin like Bitcoin," right? So I feel like I've seen this go through many cyclical parts, right? It's even part of why we try to do this. It's just I tell people like, all right, price of crypto goes up, goes crazy. It's all over CNN. Everyone's downloading a Robinhood app. Then 18 months later, this thing crashes again. And then you have another 3 months of negative news. Everyone's scared. This time seemed really bad. Like, I never had everyone I know in crypto call me like, man, like I might leave this space, right? And I think it was kind of a gut punch, in the fact that like no one was like thinking that was possible, right? Or that like this kid was just like a blatant, not what he seemed, but
yeah. I mean, look, I think people are using FTX as a really good sort of lightning rod to come in and like scrub the industry, right? These congressmen that are now running around, screaming for regulation. They don't even know what needs to be regulated, right? They just know,
they were letting him write the bill.
They're right. That's exactly right. They just know now bad and we got to fix it, right? And so we're in this very reactive place right now. I think that there is going to be a fair amount of regulation. There are going to be, tax implications for liquidating, digital currency holdings and things like that. Again, more importantly, it's just the regulation for the most part, as far as I'm concerned, a lot of it was already there. People just were flying under the radar and running a little fast and loose, right? What's really happening is just everybody is overreacting and they're like, you know what? I don't want to touch any of this stuff anymore, right? And so it's not like, oh, I'll do this program to, as long as it follows all of the regulation, blah, blah, blah. No, they're just like, I'm done. I'm out. right?
There's no regulatory sandbox they trust. I mean, you can tell them everything in the world,
They're
but
out.
still, yeah. What if it happens and I look bad, and they don't want to be that leadership. But
and really, it's all about reputational risks, right? So because so many of the articles written just fundamentally, people don't understand the complexity of what's going on here, right? They don't understand that when you're using, a Bitcoin.com debit card or a Coinbase debit card, you're not moving digital currency at point of sale, right? It's just they don't understand it, but because it's complicated, nobody understands it. Everybody's running for the hills.
yeah, it makes sense. But hey, Luke, I know we're bumping up on time here, so I want to respect everyone's time in the next 10 minutes or so. But Luke, you want to take us out with your final question, and I'll kind of close us out?
Sure.
Yeah, for sure. All right. So for my final question, I think this is a question for both of you. Since you're both like doing BD related things, and I'm pretty much a newbie to it. I've been, I don't know, growing Illini Blockchain for like 2 years or a year. What are some of like the skills or habits or mentalities that you've begun to adopt that I don't know, would make you an asset at a company, right? Like David, you've worked in this fitness industry and then now in digital payments, and Patrick, you've been in crypto for a while. Yeah, what are the skills, habits, and mentalities of like a person who's really, really good at business?
Sure. So I think I've always fundamentally believed that business development's an interesting animal. It's a combination of sales, because you're always selling, right? And fundamentally, BD is about sales. And to be successful at sales, you have to you have to really know your stuff. You have to get people to trust you, and you have to get people to like you, right? People do business with people they like, right? It's as simple as that, right? Build trust, be honest, be transparent with the folks that you're working with. A negotiation is not a zero-sum game. It's not a win-loss, right? It's not me against you. We're building a partnership, right? I've seen too many deals turn into this sort of, man against man kind of thing, where it's like, I'm going to wait you out and I'm going to win. You can't build a relationship if one person walks away from a contract signing feeling like they lost, right? You sign a contract, you do a deal with somebody, that is the beginning of your relationship. That's not the end game, right? I am starting the relationship with that customer and Mastercard when that contract is signed. I don't want them to feel beat up. I don't want them to feel like I deceived them and that I beat them into submission, right? We want both people to feel like this is going to be great. We are aligned together and we're going to go into this battle together to collectively win, right? If my customer loses in market, I lose in market, right? And so, I mean, that's kind of the simplest outlook I have about business development.
I like it. Patrick, any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, maybe I had a little. I mean, David knows like our business development guy. Like, I'm probably more good at like hiring the people and keeping them in locations. But yeah, I think to echo what David said a little bit, I think I've always been surprised just what comes of relationships, right? You can start at point A and then 1 year later, 5 years later, you never know the calls you're going to get or where it can take you. I think so. Generally be open-minded and be interesting. It's always not too hard to be a little different, and I'd say like don't be scared to like take risks or try something weird, you know what I mean, like to build those relationships just like any other relationship, right? Like if you wanted to attract a good looking date, right, you want to stand out from the crowd. But hey, I'll take us out here the last few minutes, and I really enjoyed this conversation. It's been quite interesting. But David, when you and I guess maybe Mastercard in general, if you guys look out, like I don't know, the heart, maybe it's 5 years, maybe it's 10 years. When I'm walking into a store or I'm doing a few different transactions, like what does that look like that's much different than now, or is it like very similar to now? I mean, it's a phone.
I mean, look, our hope is always it's going to look just like it looks now, right? Regardless of the digital currency. That's the beauty of our network. That's the beauty of Mastercard for our customers in, like, 190 countries, right? You don't want it to be different. You want it to be the same, right? And so a lot of what we're building is to provide that interoperability on the back end. So for the consumer, whether he's tapping at point of sale with crypto, stablecoin, dollars or rupees, it's the same experience regardless of where they are. That's the beauty of the network we created, right? For merchants, it's the ability to have a safe and secure transaction regardless of whatever currency they accept. We want to help make these transactions smoother and safer for our customers, right? I mean, one of the big challenges all these crypto companies face is the high rate of declines at point of sale, right? If you try and use a credit or a debit product to buy an NFT or to buy digital currency, the decline rates are super high, right? Because of all kinds of crazy things, right? We want to help make those better and smoother and make those transactions more have declines fall so everybody can have a good experience at point of sale.
My smoothest payment experience is my Apple Pay to BitPay card with Mastercard logo and like from crypto. It works perfectly well. But last thing here, and I'll close this out. But there's, I don't know, call it 1,000 students, something to be watching this. How would you, if you're going to school today, and a lot of these kids are thinking about blockchain as a career, maybe their mom is calling them or their grandma after FTX and saying, "Hey, are you working in that Bitcoin thing? I don't know. I've been watching it on the news." What advice would you give them as they look to enter the workforce, and how would you think about
it? So look, I've been in the Valley for a long time. My first job ever was at Netscape, which was the very start of the internet. I didn't take a job at Netscape because I wanted to get rich. I took a job at Netscape because I thought what they were doing is really cool. So anybody who's chasing a career to make money is ultimately going to be pretty unhappy, has been my experience in life. If you make money along the way doing things that you love and that you're good at, that's a win, right? I guess my advice always is do what you like, because this is really hard, right? Make sure you actually like what you do, and then the success will generally follow, right? But if it doesn't and you still love what you do, at least you don't feel like you wasted your time, right? I can't tell you how many folks I know that like, I'm gonna go do this startup because I'm gonna get rich. Well, they didn't get rich and they hated working at this startup, right? Because they didn't fundamentally have a passion for what they were doing. That's just not like a good path to success. Do what you like, do what you're good at.
Great advice. Well, for everyone watching, we hope you enjoyed this conversation. I know I did. Thanks again to Luke Clancy with the University of Illinois and Dave Galvan with Mastercard. Guys, really appreciate you making the time. And for everyone watching, we hope you guys are enjoying it. And stay tuned. We will go into the next interview from this. Thank you guys very much. Yeah.
Thanks, guys.